closer to Tallahassee than we were Atlanta. So it's funny seeing people across the state, and it's an interesting time to be in Georgia because you have people in metropolitan areas like Atlanta singing the same tunes as the people in Northwest Georgia or coastal Georgia or anywhere else. Everyone, for the most part, recognizes what type of constitutional crisis that we face here in Georgia. You know, it was interesting when I was down at the 2nd District GOP meeting on Saturday. There was a lot of folks running for Congress, and they all got up there and they gave their speech about Congress, and they kept talking about the socialists and the fascists and all of that in D.C. And I asked every one of them, I said, why are you running to go to D.C.? Why aren't you fighting here? Why aren't you running for state senator, state representative? Because the communists and the fascists, they're here. The front line, the battle lines are in Atlanta. One of my fellow senators, in case you're not aware of the 18 people that have been indicted, one of them is a fellow senator. He's facing the rest of his life in jail. He's already had to sell one of his warehouses. He spent, I think, roughly $600,000 to $700,000 at this point in his legal defense, and will probably soon spend over $1 million. Those 18 that have been indicted, they're going to have to spend roughly $1 million each to defend their innocence. And people think, well, maybe they did something wrong. There are so-called Republican senators within the caucus who believe that these individuals may just be guilty of something. Well, let's look at some of the crimes that these people are accused of committing. David Schaefer is accused of impersonating a public officer. That's it. He's going to face the rest of his life. What is he doing impersonating a public officer? Well, here's how crazy it's all gotten in Atlanta. The prosecutor that's prosecuting him for impersonating a public officer has yet to sign on to their oath to the Constitution. So that prosecutor is guilty of impersonating a public officer while he is prosecuting and taking political prisoner of someone he says is impersonating a public officer. And this person is going to have to spend roughly $1 million to defend their good name. I've never had a spare $1 million, and I don't think many of you have either. But if I ever had a spare $1 million, I would love to go buy a ranch in Montana, a place to go hide out in the mountains if it gets any worse. I wouldn't want to defend my innocence in a court of law in Fulton County. Here's the thing about Fulton County. Fulton County and these charges come from a district attorney, and she's operating under state law, state RICO law. All of the crimes apparently happened at the Georgia State Capitol. And then she decided, since it was RICO, she would use her jurisdictional powers to travel elsewhere. She has charged the election director of Coffee County, this retired school teacher who is managing the elections of Coffee County. Apparently had 3 different counts on the election machine, didn't in good conscience feel like she could submit that to the Secretary of State. Now she's facing the rest of her life in jail. They're being charged as if they're an organized crime syndicate. Mm-hmm. But one doesn't have to look very far to see the real crime syndicate. The fact that if you've ever seen the movie 2,000 Mules, you recognize that ballots were printed off and they were stuffed into drop boxes, not funded by the government, but funded by Zuckerberg. Right?
Right.
It was a scheme, very RICO in nature. But our Georgia Bureau of Investigation never inquired into the nature of that, like they had inquired into the nature of the 18 that have been indicted. That's scary stuff. Especially when we have so-called Republicans in leadership. Now, if you go to our website and you look at what are the principles of the Republican Party, one of the main principles of the Republican Party is protecting constitutional rights. What are those constitutional rights? Well, they're God-given, guaranteed rights. Protections from a rogue government. What is the first? The right to petition the government. The right to speak freely. Right? What is number 2? The right to protect oneself. Right? What is number 5? The right to protect oneself from incrimination. Right? These are protections to limit a government. Even the 10th. The right for a state to protect itself in decision-making against a rogue federal government. You see, that's what we swear an oath to when we're elected to office, is to protect and defend that Constitution. So, you all elected me to be your state senator, and it is the highest honor of my life, and I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity. But I take the oath extremely seriously. Our freedom, this is the last place that it exists on this earth. There is no place else. You cannot go to Ireland, you cannot go to England, you cannot go to South Korea or Japan and find freedom of speech. It's right here. We still have it. We must protect it. Some would argue maybe we don't have it because if you question the integrity of an election, you may be drawn into RICO charges in Fulton County. But you know, if we had an attorney general who was a little more forceful, one might recognize that the state capital is sovereign territory of the state of Georgia, not sovereign territory of Fulton County. Because if this district attorney has this much power, any of the decisions that we make under the Gold Dome, she could prosecute us for that. I realized it was dangerous. When the indictments roll out, and about a week before, the majority caucus of the Senate had a meeting. The president pro tem kind of directs the meeting, and he says, gentlemen, we're going to remain quiet because we don't want to agitate this district attorney. We don't want to agitate the system. We don't want to make this any harder on our fellow senator. Well, I certainly wasn't going to go down that route. Then the indictments come out, and about 4 days later, the majority caucus has yet to have a plan. No plan of action. Well, I decided to call for a special session because we as a legislature have the ultimate check and balance against a rogue district attorney. It's constitutional. We have an inherent subpoena power. We control the money. We control the purse. The legislature being the most important of the three in government, we're closest to the people, right? We get to decide how taxes are going to be levied and how those are going to be spent. Well, Fani Willis gets $3.5 million of our taxpayer money. She gets federal money. She also gets money from Fulton County. And here's the funny part about that money that we allocate, the $3.5 million. If you talk to our district attorney here in the Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit, he will tell you that he has a triage of cases. Why does he have a triage of cases? Because he doesn't have enough attorneys. Where are his attorneys? Well, there are attorneys here in Northwest Georgia. But Fani Willis in Fulton County and the other metropolis counties, they're able to outbid him and our tax dollars here. So we have attorneys who are working from home here in Northwest Georgia, and they're working for the metropolis counties. Meanwhile, where's the justice for our citizens? So that $3.5 million, Fani Willis obviously has too much money because she's got 500 plus people backed up that police have brought into the jail and said they committed a crime, but yet she's failed to charge them. She's failed to provide justice to the victims or them. But meanwhile, she's taking on these political prisoners. That $3.5 million should be reallocated back to rural districts like ours so we can handle justice, and maybe Fani Willis won't have as much money to take on her rogue powers. People say, well, it's not good that you've been kicked out of the majority caucus. That could be very detrimental for our district. And when I was talking with Senate leadership about this, I was threatened with that. President Pro Tem said, Senator, when we push you out of this caucus, you know, part of the job of being a good senator is making sure your district is taken care of. Have you thought about that? I said, oh, Senator, I've thought about it. You know, I would love to have new asphalt on all of our roads. And Lord knows the library needs some more grant money. But none of that makes a difference if we don't have freedom itself.
Amen. That's right.
I said, Senator, it's a question of a bygone past. I would love to be a senator elected and just be worried about bringing home the bacon. But right now I'm trying to defend the freedom of the citizens of Northwest Georgia.
Amen.
And they demand it.
Amen. Right on.
You see, we have a governor right now who took 19 days to certify the election results. There were 40,000 affidavits of fraud. 40,000 people signed at the threat of perjury that they would go to jail, that they saw something wrong with our elections. And they stem all of this from Donald Trump's call that says, oh, he only needs 12,000 votes. Well, I think all the president was asking is just open up the first 3 boxes of the 40,000 you have sitting there.
Right on.
Right? But look at the precedents that this starts setting. Because when I started calling for a special session and started reminding citizens across the state that their representative or their senator had yet to take action, some of these senators got upset. One of them calls me up and says, Colton, listen, I'm a co-conspirator. I'm on the list, but fine. And that, please don't say my name publicly. Please don't bring me into this at all. And I said, I used some French words, that's nonsense, Senator. I said, you represent 200,000 people just like I do, and now you're chilling your voice. You're a member of the Republic, a member of the Senate, a constitutional organ that is supposed to put a check and balance on this type of thing, and now your voice has been chilled. That's dangerous. That's when I say the front lines are in Atlanta. The communist takeover is in the Senate chamber when you have members who call themselves Republicans and are reluctant to say anything because they are worried they'll find themselves in judicial peril.
Amen.
That's right. You know, on top of all of that, we have a border crisis like our country's never seen. And I don't want to get into another problem without giving you a solution to the first problem. So before I talk about the border, let me give you a solution to the first problem. One of the things that's always bothered me the most is representatives saying we haven't heard from our constituents. We didn't know that's what our constituents wanted. Well, that excuse no longer exists anywhere in the state of Georgia because every Republican senator and every state representative know that their constituents are upset. They may not sign on to the special session for some odd reason. But I tell you what, when we get back into session, I'm drafting up a piece of legislation right now to Prevent Political Persecutions Act.
Okay.
Now, what is that? If you look at RICO across any of the other states, they all have a monetary component. What is the monetary component? It means you've involved yourself in organized crime or drug dealing and you're making money off of it, and that's the RICO part. So if you just added that into the language, effectively, Fonnie Willis would immediately have to drop the charges. You say, well, how can you retroactively make law? Well, a good example of this is look at the marijuana law. Marijuana was absolutely illegal, treated like methamphetamine in the state of Georgia. Then the legislature said, well, there's 12 reasons why you may be able to have it. And all of those people who showed up in court and were able to prove that they had one of those 12 conditions, the jury had to read off the new law and not the old law.
That's correct.
The problem is, RICO ought to have been used against those people stuffing those ballots. So it's going to be a very careful needle to thread to craft a piece of legislation that essentially eliminates and brings peace on earth to the 18 that have been indicted, but also still allows a future GBI to investigate and to prosecute those types of people who actually steal an election. So that's the solution there. Hopefully, by the time we get to January in the legislature, those representatives and those senators will be begging to sign on, do something to get the heat off of their constituents that currently exists now. That's the game plan there. A lot of senators are upset because they're worried that I'm helping people primary challenge them. And I am.
All right, bring it.
A similar scheme just worked in Texas with Ken Paxton, who was the Attorney General, and he was impeached. There was enough votes in the Senate to impeach him, but there was also enough threats and enough primary challengers across Texas to those rhinos that guess what? When the vote happened, Ken Paxton was not impeached. Okay? So some people say, oh, this is just all about Donald Trump. You just love Donald Trump. This is far bigger than Donald Trump.
Amen.
This is about protecting basic American freedoms.
Amen.
Right? Whether you like Donald Trump or not, Donald Trump's got a right to question the integrity of an election just like all of us do, because that provides transparency.
Amen.
Back to the next problem, the border. There's about 10,000 people a day coming across the border illegally. Okay, we've just, in the last few months, we've created another congressional district with illegal immigrants. Every 10 days, if you've ever been to Sanford Stadium in Athens and watched the Bulldogs play, every 10 days you've got a Sanford Stadium's worth coming in. Now, Dade County, where I come from, has experienced a little bit more of this in the past. When Governor Abbott of Texas started shipping those buses in, a lot of them were getting off in Trenton and in Tiptonia coming through. They would literally run up to the Hardee's or the McDonald's and beg for food. A lot of times they had brand new clothes on, no money, no English, nothing but a beg. What is the solution to this? Well, we have a fentanyl crisis too, right? I had a committee hearing. I'm the chairman of Interstate Cooperation. What's so funny, I've been kicked out of the majority caucus, but I'm still the chairman of Interstate Cooperation, so I'm technically still a part of Senate leadership, even though I'm not a part of the majority caucus. And God bless the Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones, because he's effectively recognizing the real Republican Party.
Good.
But I had this hearing, it was 3 hours long, brought in the sheriff of Goliad County, Texas, brought in Tom Holman, Trump's ICE director, brought in a district attorney of Texas, a Texas judge, a Texas state representative, brought in the number 2 of Hartsfield-Jackson, brought in Major General Cardin of the Georgia National Guard. Now talk about Republicans gaslighting you. We've got this big border crisis, and the leadership at the top will tell you, oh, we've got Georgia National Guard down at the border. Well, I asked the Major General, I said, are any of our troops in harm's way down at the border? He said, oh, no, Senator, they're not in harm's way because they're just working for Border Patrol. They're just doing administrative work. So what are they doing? They're just signing paperwork and sending them on their way right back to us. Looks very different from the historical photos of the Georgia National Guard at the border in the early 1900s, where you saw them with pistolas and rifles standing on horseback looking across the border into Mexico, daring them to come across. You see, those Texans, I asked them, I said, why did you come to Georgia? And they said, because we are desperate. The sheriff of Goliad County, Texas, he showed videos of cartel coming even like 100 miles north into the border with Barrett 50 cows laying on their dash waving at Texas state troopers. He said the cartel experiences no law enforcement friction until they're probably 100 miles north of the border right now. He said they'll come in waves. So they'll send over 10,000 folks over here, and then they've got a fentanyl run over here. So it's absolute chaos and distraction. He said, we're absolutely desperate. We can't even get our own governor to do anything. Before the sheriff came and testified, the governor's office called him and wanted to talk him down a little bit before he went to testify in the Georgia Senate Committee. And I said, well, what's the solution to the problem? And they said, well, the solution worked out during COVID for 4 days. Said the governor, because of COVID, decided he would shut down all the commerce. Well, how did he shut down the commerce? Well, he did it with vehicle inspections. He said any vehicle coming from Mexico into the United States had to go through a vehicle inspection. Well, we know how government works, very terrible. So obviously there's a long line of vehicles trying to get into the United States. It took 4 days, and all the governors of the provinces of Mexico called up Governor Abbott and said, please do whatever you can to open up the border. We are desperate. And they said, you have to go into Mexico, and you ask anybody, what's the difference between the cartel and the government? And they said, they'll tell you it's synonymous, it's one and the same. Yeah. So you have to cost Mexico more in legitimate trade than what they are making in illegitimate trade. That's human trafficking and fentanyl. Another thing that came up in the testimony was back when Trump was president, it would cost you about $2,000 or $3,000 if you were an illegal alien to come across the border. That's how much you'd have to pay the cartel. Today, that rate has went up to about $15,000. Many of these individuals haven't seen $15,000 ever in their life. So what do they become? Indentured servants. Mm. The gentleman from Dallas who testified there, the state rep, I'm pretty sure it was him. There was a Mexican restaurant nearby, had a stabbing in the kitchen. The police show up to the Mexican restaurant. They start getting everyone's address, and turns out everyone at the Mexican restaurant has the same address. So they go, well, what is this address? Well, it's owned by somebody from Mexico. About 2 or 3 weeks later, another Mexican restaurant, there's a stabbing in the kitchen. Police show up. Guess what? Everyone in there had the same address as the previous Mexican restaurant. All of these individuals were indentured servants working for the cartel. They were paying their way from getting across the border. We haven't seen this type of indentured servitude since the 1800s. And what was so funny is, on that committee hearing, I convinced one of the most liberal Democrats in the Senate. could potentially one day be governor. His name's Josh McLaurin, Senator Josh McLaurin. After hearing this, he had a completely different perspective as a Democrat about the border, because he finally got to see what's really going on. He finally got to hear about the indentured servitude that exists in this country, some of which has moved its way into Atlanta. The fentanyl is a very dangerous drug. Why is fentanyl so dangerous? Because in order to move the high of the drug, they got to make the drug smaller and smaller to get it across. We used to think methamphetamine was something bad. This fentanyl, if you get it on your fingernail, it can kill you. Over in Dade County, where I'm from, the ambulance driver went to pick somebody up who was having a fentanyl overdose. Puts him into the back of the ambulance, starts driving to Chattanooga to the hospital, and his whole world starts caving in on him. All he did was touch the man's arm, and it had a little fentanyl residue on it, and he had to be treated at the hospital just like the guy in the back. He was the ambulance driver. So now our first responders are going to have to carry around Narcan, not necessarily for the citizen who's overdosed, but for themselves and their own protection. I don't want to live in a society where that's where I have to worry about. Well, what's the solution to the border? You see, we had a governor who said that he had a big truck, carry off criminal illegals himself.
Yep.
But he sold the truck. Now he's got a strongly worded letter to the Biden administration. You see, the governor could declare an invasion. And when you declare an invasion, you've got certain tools, one of which would be tariffs against Mexican products. You go into Home Depot or Lowe's, you go buy a refrigerator, most likely it's made in Mexico. If we started putting a tariff on all these Mexican products and let Texas and everybody else do the same, start costing these people more in legitimate trade than what they're making in illegitimate trade, maybe they would sober up a little bit. You know, there's a lot of problems in our society, and another of those, people ask me, aren't you got voted out of the caucus? And I say, well, I'm out of a caucus that couldn't even pass a strong transgender mutilation bill. You see, we had a piece of legislation to ban transgender surgeries for those under 18, fully, including puberty blockers. But there were so-called Republicans who happened to have medical degrees who didn't want to include puberty blockers. So you could just take the puberty blocker, wait till you're 18, and then go have the surgery. I don't know if I want to be in a caucus with those types of people, because they might as well be liberal Democrats.
Amen.
You know, it was funny, of all of the members who debated that transgender piece of legislation, it was like me and the author and maybe one other Republican that were fighting all of the Democrats. You can go back and watch the video. All the other so-called Republicans left and went into the ante room. That's the kind of people I'm dealing with. So I'm super excited I get to travel across the state right now and encourage people to go run for office.
All right.
Folks, I want to thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this fight. Because I cannot imagine a more important fight than what we have right now. When I was sitting there talking to those members of that caucus leadership, I said, gentlemen, I said, if you're not willing to do anything, I said, you might as well go to your nearest national cemetery and go spit on the graves.
That's right.
Bring it.
I had a senator from Columbus who came unglued. He said, my granddaddy fought at Normandy. How dare you say that? I said, Senator, I said, my granddad fought Nazis in World War II too. And those two gentlemen didn't go over there and risk everything they have for us to sit on our butt when we have fascist communists in Atlanta ourselves.
That's right. That's right.
I still have a great hope for this nation and for the people in it. You know, we're all very politically active in this room. I mean, I recognize most every single one of you, and we've all had conversations at some point. But just wait until those people at the ball fields on Saturdays, wait till they get it.
That's right.
Wait till all the people in our society who are not politically active, who are not here, start waking up to what's going on. And they are waking up very quick because their dollar does not go very far. And the government that you would expect, what? Public safety, transportation, those things that are the proper role of government, when those resources start declining and declining, people start waking up. Think about this, we had a $6 billion surplus in last year's budget and probably will have the same again here. Is it not a crying shame that the state troopers are having to put out yard signs like they're running for office to try to recruit state troopers?
Mm-hmm.
What a crying, and we call ourselves Republican-controlled legislature. But yet we have never built back up the state patrol since the 2008 austerity cuts. You know, there was a big brag that, oh, well, we increased the salary this year of state troopers. Well, not quite enough, and then they left out all the motor carrier compliance. All those black state troopers, you know, those state troopers go through more training than all the other state troopers combined because they have to take all the federal regulation too. Guess what? They didn't get a raise. As a matter of fact, their benefit plan got left behind so much that in an unlikely and an unfortunate event, if a bullet was to go through a blue state trooper's shirt and go into a black state trooper's shirt, the blue one would get a higher medical benefit than the guy in the black shirt would. We had a state trooper right here in Catoosa County, or in this district, going through 75, chasing a felon down, takes the felon out, breaks his neck in the process. Completely, disabled, can never be a police officer again. Has a wife and kids. The best the state can offer him is $1,100 a month in insurance. How do you expect someone to go out into the front lines and defend our society if that's the best we can offer them? Especially when you can watch television now and you can see these people coming across the border and people ask, well, where are you from? Oh, we're from Syria. Where are you headed? We're headed to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Not with good intentions either. We're not ready for an invasion. We're not.
No.
We have sold our state out in the interest of the corporatism.
Amen. Amen.
When we can give away billions of dollars to the film industry, and they can make movies that promote death, but we can't spend money on caution lights to prevent it, we've got a problem.
Mm-hmm. That was right. That was right. 100%.
So if there are any questions from anyone,